All right, so today we're going to talk about writing an equation in slope-intercept form given a slope and a y-intercept. So remember in previous units we talked about slope, which is the rate of change, the rise over run, and the y-intercept is where the graph crosses the y-axis, okay? So first of all, what is slope-intercept form? Slope-intercept form is the general form for writing an equation of a line. We call it y equals mx plus b, so that's the form where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. And so when we write the equation, we leave the y and x, we only replace the m and the b, okay? So now how do we write an equation in slope-intercept form given the slope and the y-intercept? Basically, like I just said, we plug in the slope for m, and then we plug in the y-intercept for b, making sure to be careful of the signs. So let's do some examples. So in example 1, if the slope is -4 and the y-intercept is 1, remember the y, we're going to have y equals, well, m, because remember our slope is m, is -4x, and our y-intercept is 1, so it becomes +1. And so with the slope of -4 and a y-intercept of 1, the equation would be y equals -4x plus 1. Okay. All right, in example 2, we have m, which is the letter for slope, and b, which is the letter for the y-intercept. And then we're going to plug it into the formula y equals mx plus b. So again, this is y equals 5x plus 3. So we got a +3 there. Okay. And so now that's the equation of that line that has that slope and that y. Example 3, we have a slope of 2 and a y-intercept of -5. So again, we have y equals our slope of 2x, x has to be in there, but we have a negative y-intercept, so that becomes -5. So that equation is y equals 2x minus 5. In example 4, you have a slope of 3/4 and a y-intercept of -4. So we write that equation. We're just going to replace the m with 3/4. Then we have our x, and we have a y-intercept of -4, so that is -4. And then in example 5, we have a slope of -2/3 and a y-intercept of -7. So we have y equals the slope, which is -2/3. Then we put our x, and then our y-intercept is -7. So that means our line here crosses the y-axis at -7 and then has a slope of -2/3. So in example 6, we got the slope is -3/5 and the y-intercept is 0. So again, we fill it in. Y equals the slope of -3/5 x, and now we have a y-intercept of 0, so we can have +0. Now, because it's +0, we don't need to write it, and so our equation would look like y equals -3/5 x. And so when you don't see a y-intercept written, that y-intercept should be understood to be 0. All right, so be careful in number 7 because it's written backwards. So the y-intercept is -9, but the slope is 0. So let's think about the type of line that has a slope of 0. So if we fill this out, we get y equals, still the same way, slope is 0, x, and a y-intercept of -9. Now, since we know that 0 times x is 0, that can go away, and we're left with y is equal to -9. And so that's the equation if the slope is 0, and we just know where it crosses the y-axis. Okay? And so remember, a line with a slope of 0 is a horizontal line. So you can jot that down as a reminder. Okay? And then example 8, you have a y-intercept of 12 and a slope of -7. So again, here, be careful with the order. So y equals -7x plus 12 for a positive 12. So it's basically as simple as writing in the slope and the y-intercept. Now we kind of want to see, can we go the other way? So how do you identify the slope and y-intercept from an equation when it's written in slope-intercept form? So if it's written in the form y equals mx plus b, remember the slope is the number before the x, but it does not include the x. It's just the number in front of the x. And the y-intercept is the number in the place of b. And so be careful when you're trying to determine the sign. So in example 9, we got y equals -3x plus 5. And so see, this is in the form y equals mx plus b. So your m has to be the -3. And then your y-intercept, the plus the b, is 5. Okay. In example 10, we do the same thing. This is in y equals mx plus b form. So your m, which is your slope, would be 4. And your y-intercept, be careful, it's a -6. So your y-intercept would be -6. And then if we look at example 11, we have y equals 7x. So y equals mx plus b. What we see is that there is no plus or minus anything, so that tells us that our b is 0. Okay, so our y-intercept doesn't mean we don't have one, it just means it crosses at 0, and our slope would be 7. All right, so again, if I look at example 12, we got y equals -x. So we write y equals mx plus b. Again, I have nothing in the spot for b. There's no plus or minus, so that tells me our y-intercept is at 0. But if I look what's in front of the x, because that's where our m would be, I just see a negative sign. And so that should be understood that that one should be a -1. Okay. All right, and then in example 13, we have y equals mx plus b. So right now, I don't see any x. So I don't see a number in front of x. So again, when we see that, that means our slope is 0 because the x ended up going away because it was multiplied by 0. And then our b would be just our 5, positive 5. And so remember, that is now a horizontal line that passes the y-axis at 5. And now if we look at 14, we have y equals mx plus b. So hopefully you can tell that that one isn't truly written in slope-intercept form. So we can rearrange it to make that work. So this can become y equals, and now we know we want this piece to come in the front. So always take the sign in front of it. So that's y equals -2x, and then 5 is positive plus 5. So now that equation is written in slope-intercept form, which now our slope is -2, and our y-intercept is 5. All right.